Good morning. I'm Rodney Kincaid, and I have a company, commercial construction, by the name of Kincaid Construction. We started the operation in 1963 after leaving two firms that I joined after getting out of the University of Florida, one being H.J. High Construction, which is still active. Another one is R.C. Stevens Construction, which is still active. So I got a lot of experience getting out of college, learning a lot about construction through the Department of Building Construction at the University of Florida. But then I really got my act together when I actually went out in the field and worked for both of these wonderful construction companies that are still operating today. Our company has changed so much in the 56 years that have passed by that we find ourselves, instead of outbidding public work, putting up security bonds, you had to get the low price or you didn't get a project. Things started changing, and people said, you know, I don't like this system. We get the low bidder, and then he argues and fights for change orders, and he never delivers on time, and there's got to be a better way. So somebody came forth and said, we need to have a negotiated system where we select the contractor and then we negotiate the price and the work. And so what is said to me as a contractor, how are you going to be selected? You're going to be selected on the basis of your merit and your reputation. So that was one of the things that I was very keenly concerned about in my company as I started my small firm. And I had the opportunity to meet a retired general who had gone to work for the Southland Corporation, which is a parent company to 7-Eleven. And he took a liking to me, and he said, I'm going to give you one of our 7-Eleven stores to build here in Central Florida. So I said, well, wonderful. So we built the store. He called me up and he said, I got another store I want you to do, and another store, and another store, and another store. We went through somewhere around 30 to 35 7-Eleven stores all over Central Florida. That was the way I really got my company going. But then I worried about it. I'm going to be nicknamed Rodney Kincaid, the Kincaid Construction 7-Eleven store builder. So there was a good side and a bad side. The good side was I was making good money and also learning a lot about running my own company. But the bad side was that I was getting known for only ability as to build a 7-Eleven store. So I said, you got to get strategy together. What are you going to do about this? And I said, you're never calling on architects in the community, and they're the ones who mostly decide who and recommend the owner who they should get to build their new building. So I started knocking on doors, introducing myself to a number of the contractors. And that was probably the smartest thing I've done today, because they called me back and they said, Ronnie, we got this project coming up and we'd like you to give us a bid. So that started out a whole new area of work for us, negotiated, but then at the same time, it wasn't that plentiful, so we were out bidding jobs also. And some of the jobs you might recognize that we've done in Central Florida is the Edith Bush Civic Theater in Lock Haven Park, the 3-story, 30,000 square foot medical condominium building at Winter Park Hospital, Galen Black Ford, which has changed its name now, and in Apopka. And we did almost all of Don Mealy's work when he came to Orlando, started. And so we started developing involvement with business people who were continually needing our service. And Mealy was one of the outstanding examples because he was growing his business and that was giving me an opportunity to grow mine. So we had a very close relationship. And I look back, that's what I thought about in the very beginning. What was making this opportunity to get into some work without having to get the cheapest price in the market? And I realized it was what I was displaying in the way of quality work and honesty and saying and doing the same thing. So to that day, we're now almost entirely into design build, which was another thing to come up. Owner said, look, I go hire an architect, then I hire a construction company, and then they argue about all during the job. Well, you didn't show that correctly, so I didn't bid it that way. Well, you should have known. So that kind of stuff started up, and I said, there's got to be a solution here. And so that I went to a couple of architects who I had worked for and appreciated and respected, and I said, hey, you guys, would you like to do what I'm going to call design build work? And they said, well, tell me a little bit about it. Well, I've got some clients that want a building built, and I can go to them and say, we will do a package for you, a design build, where you get the architect working for me as a contractor, and then me as a contractor building it, so that you don't have this problem with the two arguing with each other. Well, that has really become to the forefront now, and it's architects at first resisted this because they thought they were being compromised by the contractor and they needed to stand independently. But we slowly changed that attitude, and today many architectural firms have contractors who regularly call on them to serve their needs in design work. So this is kind of the revolution from the last 56 years of how things have changed for our company. We, in the interim, I think the last public works job we did was a fire crash rescue building at Orlando Airport, which still was called McCoy at that time. But they had built a new east runway, and then they built a taxiway between the old west 2 runways and the new one on the east side. So they wanted to build a fire station to be able to operate on any runway where they had an accident or a problem. So we went out and built that, and we struggled with all of you wouldn't believe the red tape. From the FAA had their fingers in the specifications and the plans. Orlando International had their crew, they had their engineer, and we're all finishing up this job, and everybody seemed to be pretty happy. And one morning I happened to be out there talking with my superintendent, and he said, guess what? I said, what? What now? He said they came in and told me that they'd forgot to include the lift station and there's nowhere for the sewage to go. I said, well, that's wonderful. Well, it's even worse than that. FAA is flying in for their headquarters in Atlanta to christen this new runway, and they're going to also meet in this new fire station. So that bathroom better be operational. So I called up a sewer company, and I said, can you put a lift station in the next 5-6 days? And they said, you're kidding. I said, no, I'm not kidding. So he said, well, let me see what I can do. So he goes to his manufacturer, and he said, most of those things were starting to be prefabricated rather than built out of concrete. They were out of steel. So he found one in Atlanta, Georgia, and he arranged to get a truck to put it on and haul it down, and got it down there to us, and we set it in and tied it all together, and we made the deadline. But you talk about pressure. When I told them, I don't know if I can do it, and they said, we're going to hang you by the closest airplane wing. And I said, okay, I don't want that. So there were a lot of interesting things going on. But today, as I said, we're doing exclusively design build. We're selecting the architect who understands the kind of a building that's planned by the owner, and that's the way we choose the architect to work with us. And so that's my story, and it's been a long, wonderful time. I've really enjoyed it. There have been headaches, but I've forgotten what they were. But the pluses are still in my memory, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity and the education I got from the University of Florida, and the encouragement I got from that retired general who really gave me my start.
Rodney, I have a question. One of the things that you've mentioned in the past is that you help people find land that's going to be appropriate for their building. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. One of the problems, everything is so complex today. We've had customers or potential customers come to us, say, we just bought a lot over in Orlando and we want to build this building on it. And they describe the size of the building, 2 stories, so many hundreds of square feet. And I look at them and I said, "What do you have a survey?" "Oh yeah, here it is." And I looked at the survey, and then I listened to what he was telling me as far as the size of the building he wanted. And I said, "We've got a problem." He said, "What?" "You haven't got a big enough lot for what you want to do." Well, he said, "My goodness, it's 10,000 square feet, and I'm only going to be building a 5,000 square foot building. What's wrong with that?" "Well, you forgot you've got to have so much parking based upon the square footage of your building, and you're talking about a 3 or 4 story building, so that's a lot of parking. You got to retain the first hour of rainwater on the site, and you got all these setback requirements that the city has control over. So when you look at all of those items, you can't get all that on this lot." He was just stunned about the whole thing. And he went back to the realtor. Apparently they hadn't closed yet, and he said, I talked with my contractor, and this property is just not large enough to do what I want done, and so I'm going to withdraw my offer. So we just, by the nick of grace, saved him from a terrible thing if he had to go through buy that land and then you couldn't use it. So we try to get in early. Somebody calls up and said, "We're thinking about building a building." I said, "Wonderful, let's sit down and talk about it." And the first thing we talk about is, where are you going to put it? Do you have the land now, or are you looking at land? If you are, I want to be involved with you and make sure you don't run into the problem that I just discussed. So it's, like everything else and all of you are facing is the complications of doing business today. It just doesn't let you nearly focus on what you started out to do. All of these factors come in, and you have to adjust for them. And this is a case where we contractors, as I said earlier, we would bid with 3 or 4 other contractors, and the low price got the job, and you went and did it. You didn't worry about architect, engineer. You didn't worry about whether the codes were all correct for it. It was somebody else's responsibility. So, but like I said earlier, what really changed all that is when owner said, "I am tired of being jerked around. When I want to build a building, I want one person to be responsible and make sure that everything is correct for me."
I do have one other question, Rodney. You got known as a church builder. How did that happen?
We had an architect friend that was very close with. We enjoyed working together, and he called up and said, "I'm getting ready to do a church. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Well, certainly." And it was down in southwest Orlando. We built that, and then somebody else, church member, was in business, and he said, "A friend of mine's church is thinking about building. Would you like to talk to them?" I said, "I certainly would." So this just kept going on, and I found out that these ministers really talk to each other. They know what the other one's doing. And so I got a call. This was a lead from another leads group that this pastor was over on the west side of Orlando in a commercial building, and his membership had grown so that he was knocking walls out, but he couldn't raise the ceiling. So the place looked like a cavity because the ceiling got lower and lower, illusionary, because the walls were out and the space was getting bigger. So he said, "I want to raise the ceiling. It's disturbing to some of the people, the height of it." So I said, "Well, I'm coming back tomorrow with a mechanical electrical contractor, and we're going to do a little review." So we poked up the acoustical tile ceiling, and here were all of these cables, it looked like hundreds of them. And I turned around to him and I said, "What is all this?" "Well, we have a televised ministry." And I said, "Pastor, you don't want me. You don't want, no." I said, by the time we pulled all that cable loose and raised that ceiling up, we couldn't, you would miss at least one Sunday. And plus the cost would be prohibitive for all the massive number of cables. I said, I just cannot recommend it. So he said, well, listen, I really appreciate you being honest with me. We're just going to live with it. It was probably a year later, he called me up and said, we're planning on building a new church, and I'm looking around for property. And he said, I found a grocery store up in Northeast 441. And he said, I want you to meet me up there and take a look at it. Well, it was a 60,000 square foot grocery store that had been abandoned. And he said, I'm going to buy this and build my church in this store building. And he said, I not only bought this huge building, but he said, I own all the paving and the lighting that's out in front of it. So I said, well, that's wonderful. So he said, now I want you to be in charge of the whole thing. I want you to pick an architect, and I want you to build it. And the architect was one who had done a lot of church work, so we hired him to work with us, and we built that building. And lo and behold, he told me about another pastor in Sanford that wanted to build a fellowship hall, and we went up there and did a $1.2 million fellowship hall for that gentleman. So it became from that one little cable incident to a network of pastors finding out and calling on us.
Quick question for you. I know you said in the past one of your biggest sources of referrals were architects. Are you involved with any of the architectural groups in Orlando?
Yes, in fact, we had a meeting yesterday. There's a local chapter of AIA, which is American Institute of Architects, and they meet monthly, and we joined. We also have an ad in the statewide AIA, and yeah, we thought that was very important for us to support their organization. And I get to meet a lot of young architects right out of school, and it's really fun to talk to them because they're so full of beans and ready to rock and roll with their newfound skill. And so it's fascinating to be around them. And and I do admire architects. It's just amazing their capacity to see what they're going to design and fulfill that. I have a great respect for them. One of my very close friends was Neil Schweitzer, who came to Florida to oversee some work down at the college in, I'm trying to think of the college down in Southern College. And he moved his operation up here to Winter Park, and I got to know him. And as a result of that, I got the Edith Bush Civic Theater in Lock Haven Park to build. And it was one of the last things he designed. But he was from the school Frank Lloyd Wright. In fact, he worked for Frank Lloyd Wright. And Frank Lloyd Wright had done all Southern College's work and sent him to supervise it. And then he liked Florida so much he stayed and moved up to Winter Park. He passed away a few years ago, but is a very close friend and was just marvelous. I laugh over at Edith Bush. He put a exit door, and across there was a concrete beam going across there, poured beam. So my superintendent called up and he said, we got a little bit of a problem. I said, what do you mean? He said, that beam is low enough to where the door hits it, and you can't open it. I said, look, let's take that frame and get a welder to come over here and put a new piece on top and grind it and smooth it all off so we can drop the head of it, and then we'll cut that door and re-weld the steel top on it. And we don't. If Schweitzer's coming around, stay away from it. I don't want him to even know about it. and it never came to fruition. But that door, instead of being 6'8", is 6'6" high.
Great. Any question from our visitors? Rodney, thank you.
Right. Thanks for enduring that.